Hey, everybody, welcome back to Practical Liberty. This is the first episode in a new recurring series I'm going to be doing. I'm launching a new business. It's a SaaS company. And obviously, if you know anything about me, I'm the writer, marketer. I am not any kind of programming talent. So to do that, I had to bring on board a full partner in this project. And that man is Mr. Nick Watts, who you may remember from the program before. Nick, want to say hi?
Hi, nice to see everybody.
So can you give folks a little bit more of, people that haven't watched our episode, which was, it was last year, I think, at this point. Just give people your background and why I would bring you on as a technical co-founder of the company.
Sure. So for technical background, I've been mucking around with computers and trying to program them since I was about 13. So that's more than half my life now. I've done SaaS products before. I joined a SaaS startup here in Australia. I live kind of around the Gold Coast area. So I moved here in 2012 and joined what is a SaaS company when it was really only 3 developers and just starting out. And it's now, our team is now like probably 20 people, had a ton of growth. And so I've done a SaaS product from almost start to finish. It's now a very mature product with a large customer base and an incumbent in its niche. So seen all the way through that life cycle, and I'm ready to branch out and do something on my own. So I'm really excited about doing that. SaaS, for those who don't know, SaaS, software as a service. So that is any software that you run that runs on someone else's computer out in the cloud, basically. So Gmail is a SaaS. You don't have an email client that runs on your computer or on your phone. It's kind of out there on the web that it runs, and you just log into it through some online portal. So that's what SaaS is. So we're building something like that for freelancers.
Yes, exactly. And we're on Zoom, which is a SaaS, which is what I was going to say. So yeah, SaaS is literally, it's in everybody's life. It's one of those things that once it gets embedded in your life, it's really hard to get rid of, which is why it's really good company, a really good business model for entrepreneurs, especially kind of in the digital age. It's one of the best business models you can have.
Exactly. And it's great for a customer.
Yeah, do we have like a time lag when I speak and you speak?
It does happen. I am on the other side of the world.
Yeah. So actually, we should explain that for people. You are not, that accent is not Floridian or anything. That's actually a little bit of an Australian accent. You want to tell people where in Australia you are?
Yes, I'm on the east coast of Australia, in the great state of Queensland, which is, for those who don't know, is kind of like our Florida. It's the hot part, and it's also was the right place to be during COVID.
Australia was a crazy place during COVID for most of, well, I guess the whole world was a crazy place during COVID. But that's definitely a topic we're going to get into at some point. But do you want to give your libertarian cred here? Because this is a liberty loving show, right? This is not just, I didn't just go out and find a technical co-founder that was, going to get in fights with me and vote for Joe Biden. It's I don't have any socialists that I would partner with, because that would be insane. So can you walk through your liberty cred?
Yeah, so I think I was kind of a garden variety, right-leaning, would have been just garden variety Republican had I been in the USA. The equivalent of that here in Australia is stupidly called the Liberal Party. Makes no sense. It's kind of classical liberal is the theory, but they're worse than the Republicans. Story for another time. But just broadly kind of right-leaning conservative type. And then, of all things, I went to Bible college and decided I was going to write my master's thesis there on what does the Bible say about taxes. Because for reasons I thought, if I can figure that out, I can have a much better picture of Christianity and politics and how it all fits together. And I wound up talking to a guy about it who lives in the same kind of in the neighborhood where I live now, kind of up in the mountains, up in the hills behind Gold Coast, Brisbane. He's from the US. He's been in PA and in California. I can't remember where he's originally from, but he mentioned in passing, he referred to himself as an anarchist. And I thought, I have to know more about that, because I didn't think you could be a Christian and an anarchist. And he sort of said, I have time to get into it now. Just go look at Bastiat, look at Fee, read some stuff on Mises, and we'll talk about it. And, from there, I just went right down this rabbit hole and read all this stuff and sort of integrated a lot of that into the kind of biblical work I was doing. And by the time I was done with the research, I was like, okay, the ANCAPs are correct. And eventually I found Sam Konkin and agorism and all that stuff. And when that was, okay, here's something that we can really work with. So from my perspective as sort of a Christian guy, I'm going, if I'm like a missionary in China, I'm going to break a lot of laws. And like, how do I feel about that? Because I was raised to be like, we Christians, we obey the government. Not if I'm under a really hostile one, I don't. So the libertarian anarchist agorist thing kind of gave me a much better, much more rigorous intellectual framework for putting that all together. And I eventually did write the master's thesis and turned that into a book called Taxation is Slavery, the Biblical Case for Libertarian Politics. And did podcasts with Bob Murphy about that. Ended up meeting you through being mutual fans of Tom Woods. And yeah, I've kind of been rolling in libertarian circles. It turns out there are a bunch of ANCAPs in this tiny little mountain town where I live now. It's just weirdly a pocket of these kind of Christian ANCAP types. So a good place to be.
I'm still, I have a big libertarian network now, but I don't live close to any of them. There's one other libertarian person that I know in this area. He's 25 minutes away. He's a farmer. But other than that, it's been a stretch to actually find people. One of my best friends is a libertarian, but he gets up here once a month, maybe. He gets to drive from a big city. So it's pretty cool that you found your community there. What would you say that the libertarian philosophy has impacted your thoughts on entrepreneurship? Because you did work, it's working for a startup is a very entrepreneurial type of career, but it's still a career. And now, this is still very much a side hustle. I'm not trying to, you're not ready to walk out on your job like tomorrow or anything, in case your boss happens to hear this. But what would you say your libertarianism has given you in as far as business philosophy?
A bunch of different things. I think first, it really showed me what entrepreneurship is, in that it's, as much as anything, it's about allocating resources. So it doesn't always mean that if I'm going to start a software business, it doesn't necessarily mean that I want to be writing all the code, doing all the tech support, doing all those things. They're all important. They need to be done. And especially in the early days, I expect to do a lot of it. But at the end of the day, running a business is really about resource allocation. And that's an economic problem. And so just in my kind of libertarian journey, those things are very intertwined. The kind of liberty politics and just Austrian economics were all kind of meshed together into one thing. And so I got this real sense of, if we want to have a free and prosperous society that's good to live in, part of that is, respect the entrepreneur, respect the effort and the discipline that goes into properly allocating resources to satisfy the wants and needs of consumers. And that's a good thing and a positive thing. And gave you this sense of people doing business is helping society, and that's something I would like to do. Then you get into the agorist stuff, and you go, actually, this is a way to decrease the power of the state over other people. If I care about my neighbor and I want them to live a freer and happier life, one of the good things I can do is be less involved. Get out of the machine, out from under the thumb of the state as much as I can. That also kind of, every person who gets a little bit out from under the boot of the state is making it easier for the people around them to do likewise.
There's something, as far as just, practically speaking, when you're an entrepreneur, you have a lot more control over your income, and having, just acquiring resources is a way to increase your personal freedom. And one of the things that always drives me crazy about libertarians is when they're broke and they complain about it. There's just a lot of poor people that say they believe in liberty, and but then they work these, dead end jobs they're not happy with, when you could be out there. We have this economic philosophy that is better than everybody else's. We can make better entrepreneurs, and we can set examples. When you make money, you are somebody that people start looking up to. I don't know what it is. It's just something that happens. It's an accomplishment in your life. And I think libertarians or liberty-leaning people need to be better examples for the world than entrepreneurship and acquiring resources and then doing good with them, showing that you're not just like, this isn't just, I'm buying a bigger house, not that there's anything wrong with that, or I'm buying like a Ferrari. This is about, like you said, it's allocating resources. And when you control those resources, you get to allocate them better. So there's nothing wrong with wanting to get rich from entrepreneurship either.
Yeah, certainly. Actually, like if it's not too strange to share on the show, this morning I went for a walk with one of my kids, and I listened to the Bible on audio. I'm reading Proverbs, I'm listening to it. And one of the things it says is the wealth gained, I forget exactly how it's phrased, but wealth gained in vanity, through some stupid means, that goes away. Wealth that's gained gradually by diligence and discipline, that sticks around. I think that's just ancient wisdom, but I think it's very true, right? People who kind of luck into money through lottery, inheritance, that sort of thing, they often tend to lose it. And
Yeah.
a big part of the reason that people who are wealthy for the long term is because they've put the work in one way or another, not just to learn how to get the money, but how to keep it and how to keep it growing. It doesn't happen automatically.
Yeah, it's even as like my first year where I really made money was back in my early 20s. It was like 24, 25 when I first crossed the $100,000 mark, which at that age was a lot of money. And then the next year, I just got lucky. Basically, that first year, I had a good retainer. I had my first $1 million promo, so I got a little bit of royalty money coming in. And the next year, I made under $30,000, but I still spent like was making 100. So it's one of those like that was a big learning curve to like, okay, you have to keep your spending way below what your earning is. Like it's one of those. It was forced on me, but it's one of those lessons that I'm much happier having learned that at $100,000 than $1 million, right? Because you could really ruin yourself if you make too much money too fast and you don't know how to use it.
Absolutely. And yeah, seen it many times.
One of the topics we wanted to touch on was kind of I have a largely American audience, right? And you have a whole, literally the opposite side of the world. I mean, it's a globe. It's not sides. This is not flat Earth, but you know what I mean. It's a very different culture down there, and it won't. I have my four cornerstones of liberty: the Security, Wealth, Awareness Network, and security is a big thing. And in Australia, I know they did a huge gun buyback like decades ago at this point, right? Where they basically confiscated all of the guns, but they're not exactly illegal. There's some people that have them for some
No.
reasons. Can you kind of just give me the state of I guess gun laws in Australia?
Yeah, sure. So the short version is guns are basically, they're legal, but they're very difficult to own. You need a lot of licenses. You have to have all this infrastructure, a gun safe, blah, 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 all this stuff. And so in practice, almost no one has a gun, at least in the metro areas. It's a very different story once you go rural. You start going out where the farms are, there's guns. So there's like people I grew up with that I was in school with, a bunch of them moved out to a place called Tamworth. That if you got country music fans, they might have heard of that. There's a big country music festival that happens in Tamworth. But you go out there and I said, like, what do you guys do on the weekends for fun? Because you're now 3 hours inland. We grew up at the beach. You don't go surfing or fishing or anything anymore. Like, what do you do out there? He says, pig shooting.
Pig shoot.
They go around shooting pigs because the wild pigs are a huge pest and interfere with the farms and stuff. So they go out, they shoot a bunch of pigs, and they sell them for dog food meat, basically. Pigs and kangaroos.
One of the things that I almost did, because Texas has a huge wild boar problem, which I guess that's the same thing. And they sell tours to tourists where you go up in a helicopter and shoot wild boar with a machine gun right out of the side. So it's in a hick country, that's kind of I guess shooting pigs is a popular pastime anywhere in hick country around the world.
Yeah. So automatic weapons, much harder to get here, obviously. But that's not to say they don't exist. I'm aware of stories. Can't say I've personally seen it with my own eyes, but I'm aware of stories. People have buried these things in oil drums and things before that buyback. That's some years ago. That they're out there buried, a bunch of them that people didn't want to turn in. And I've heard of people going kangaroo shooting at night with automatic weapons. Remember, kangaroos, even though they're cool and they're a national animal, they are also a pest. There's too many of them in places and they need to be culled, so people go hunting them. And so they get in the back of, you would call it a pickup truck, we call it a ute, utility vehicle. So it'd stand in the back of a ute with big floodlights on the front and drive around machine gunning kangaroos. It has been known to happen.
I remember talking to you one time in one of our just regular meetings, and you were talking about like kangaroo roadkill, which is just such a hilarious concept to me. I don't know why. Like, I've told you it was right after I hit that deer, and you were telling me about somebody hitting a kangaroo, and I'm not being like sadistic or anything. I just picturing dead kangaroo roadkill was funny to me. It's you picture these animals as like foreign, and at least in the United States we don't have any kangaroo. Well, no one else has kangaroos, right? It's a uniquely Australian animal.
Only in zoos in other part of the world.
Right. It's just funny to picture them that there's so many that they're like deer to us, where they're just pests.
Yeah. There was one outside my house not too long ago. It's like they're mostly not dangerous. If you get between a kangaroo and its kid, it's Joey, the little one, that's bad. They will attack you and they can hurt you. But for the most part, they're quite docile. They're vegetarian. They eat grass. It's not a big deal. They're not dangerous really to be around unless you actually get between them and the child. But yeah, there's a lot of them around, and they're attracted. I'm pretty sure they're attracted to headlights. So big trucks, semi-trailers doing the highway at night, they jump out because they see the light, I think, and just get cleaned up by trucks all the time. So there's country roads. There's lots of kangaroo roadkill.
All right, let's play a quick gun game right now.
All right.
I know you said that the guns are mostly illegal, but let's play legal or illegal in Australia, and we're going to go through some of a little bit of my collection of guns. All right, so we're going to start out with something a little more powerful. This is the Daniel Defense chambered in 5.56.
Sounds good.
Little red dot optic there. So in Australia, legal or definitely can't have this.
Basically, can't have it. It's one of those things. If you go through enough loops and hoops, you can shoot one. So I know a guy who's he's a martial arts instructor. He's 10 different black belts. He does training sessions for security guards and this kind of thing. But one of the things he also does is there are shooting ranges here, and he'll teach people how to shoot at the shooting range. And if you go to the right range, they'll have some pretty interesting stuff that you can shoot, like something like an AR-15. I don't know if it's actually that, but something similar. But to take it home and have it in your house, nah, it's going to be extremely rare.
Not for self-defense. There's no exception for self-defense. Like, you can't defend yourself in your own home.
You can, just not with a gun.
All right, well, let's do another one. This is your classic 12-gauge shotgun. This is what Joe Biden, the president of the United States, recommends for home defense, and it is that the classic. That sound is scary. So, but shotguns, 12-gauge, nothing, no shotguns out there.
No, don't think I've ever actually seen one in the flesh.
Oh, all right. What about this? Is the cowboy gun? This is the gun that won the West. The model 1894 Winchester 3030. This is my great grandfather's. Actually, it was manufactured in like 1908, I think, by the serial number. So cowboy guns, because I kind of, for some reason, always picture Australia somewhat of cowboy country. Like the climate seems similar. A lot of the people seem like they have that attitude.
Yeah, there's lots of cattle country out here. We export a lot of beef to Japan. It's lots and lots of cattle country. And yes, if you go out to cattle country, you'll see a lot of cowboy guns.
Awesome. So there are some out there. That's nice. So personal, like, carrying defense. We got I emptied these all before, folks. Don't worry, they're safe. The SIG P320, little red dot optic, your flashlight, your laser pointer flashlight. These guns, you're not going to see a lot of these in somebody's waistband out in Australia.
I don't think I've ever seen a handgun quite that decked out before, except police. Police obviously have handguns. But private citizens having handguns, very rare. I think it's more common for people to have a rifle. And I think that's just because it's harder to hide.
Yeah,
I think it's easier to get licensed for a rifle.
So that's actually the reason. So that's I don't really carry that gun. It's too big. This is the Glock 19. This was the first handgun I ever bought. And then I ended up going with a little bit smaller Glock 43X, which is just a little easier to conceal. And then my everyday carry now is the Smith & Wesson little snub nose 38 special. So none of these are. So what are concealed carry laws like down there? Do you have anyone? And is it possible for any type of citizen at all to get a concealed carry permit?
Maybe cops. I assume cops in plain clothes are concealed carrying, obviously, but maybe some types of security guard, probably, if you do enough background checks and enough licensing and whatever. I'm sure there are a few, but it's not that common.
Yeah,
it's a bit hard to describe. That I think it's sort of this thing that feeds on itself. Once you're aware that very, very, very few people have guns, you're not really as worried about wanting one for yourself, because you don't feel like you've got to, they might have a gun, so I need to have one to even things out. I just don't expect someone to pull a gun on me. It'd be a very unlikely situation.
So is there gun
Um,
violence at all down in Australia, or I guess violence in general?
uh,
Like your crime rates, are they comparable to like US in rural versus urban type distinctions?
I I looked this up once just because I was curious. So just for violence rates, I looked up the murder rate because I thought, well, we have so many less guns, so there'll be less gun violence probably, but are there
Yeah.
actually less murders? So that's a better metric. And what I found was that for New South Wales and Victoria, which are the other, there's basically three big states down the east coast of Australia where most of the population lives. That's Queensland, where I am, that's like out Florida, New South Wales, which is, I don't know what's easy to compare it to, and then Victoria, which is like our New York. Basically, it's cold and crappy and rainy and very, very left. That's, and New South Wales, I guess, is kind of in the middle. So for New South Wales and Victoria, their murder rate is lower than most US states, but higher than some. So it kind of it'd be in like the bottom quarter of US states for murder rate. Queensland is lower, so where I am, where it's hotter and honestly more conservative, the murder rate is noticeably lower. It's about, I think it was about half what it is in New South Wales and Victoria. But there were notably US states with a lot of guns that had a lower murder rate than New South Wales and Victoria. So one that I remember sticking out to me was Iowa, because there was some exchange students I was hanging out with who were out here from Iowa at the time. So I looked that one up. It said something like 44% of households in Iowa have a firearm in them. I don't know, that's just about half. And
Yeah.
their murder rate is lower than New South Wales and Victoria, where super strong gun bans, and like they're the lefty states, so it's even stronger gun bans down there.
How do you get stronger than a total ban, basically?
Well, there's more farmers in Queensland. There's more cattle country. There's that kind of
Gotcha.
vibe is more up here.
If you take out gang violence in the US, the murder rate's actually not, it gets fairly low. We have a major gang problem in certain cities, Chicago, Philadelphia, New York. Although it has ticked up since COVID. People have gotten a little more, I don't know, antsy, murdery, whatever. I think when you raise the anxiety level in a society, murders just go up. There's a
Yeah.
direct correlation. And obviously, the lockdowns and shutdowns and everything else just caused anxiety to spike. Not to mention the fear mongering and everything else that went along with it. So I think that's ticked up the crime level. And hasn't quite receded as you would have hoped now that everything's open again. But yeah, I mean, guns don't. There's not for how many guns there's more guns than people in America, and you would like if the gun banners were correct, you would expect a gun death, multiple times a day in every city around the world. Like I live out in the country, at least 20% of the people I walk into a store with are also carrying a gun. It's just the facts out here. Everybody has one. And mostly people are pretty good at concealing it. So, but a lot of times old fat people aren't really good at hiding their guns. They stick out of their belts or they whatever. They're just not good at concealed carry. But you see guns everywhere. It's just not that scary when you're around them all the time.
Yeah, and I think I could honestly say it wouldn't worry me. I think it would take me a little bit to get used to, but inside of a week, I think if I moved to the US, I wouldn't be worried about it. And it's because I've looked at the stats and I get why people have them and what's different about here and there. Let's face it, I'm like an ANCAP libertarian. I was in many ways born in the wrong country.
Are you gonna free Australia someday?
Honestly, I don't think it can be done. I don't think there's enough appetite for it here. That's like saying free France. It's it would be good, but it wouldn't be very French. I think I'm stealing a line from what's his guy who was the previous Mises Institute president, Jeff Deist.
Jeff Deist, yeah.
He said something like that. That if you want, you could have guns everywhere in France, and it might be more free, but it wouldn't be very French. And it's a similar thing with Australia. I think it's just become a normal part of the culture that people don't expect to have guns, and I think people have gotten comfortable with it.
That's a shame. It's funny because it wasn't that long ago that they confiscated a lot of guns due to that one mass shooting.
Mm.
So there were guns in Australia at some point.
Oh yeah, and if there are definitely circles where if you mention Port Arthur, which was the big mass shooting that led to all the let's have a buyback and everything, big amnesty. If you mention Port Arthur, they will immediately go, that was fake. That was false flag. They made it up to take the guns. I have no idea. I haven't really gone down the rabbit hole to see whether I think that's true or not, because at this point I don't think knowing whether it was real or not isn't really going to change anything for my life. At this point, I don't think I can turn the tide. but certainly there is a contingent of people who do think that.
I'm very tempted to dive down that rabbit hole now. I'm gonna research that at some point, and I will let the podcast audience know whether that was for real or a false flag. Um, I do want to talk one more thing. COVID was a very different experience by state in America, but everybody heard, like, one of the big talking points was that, Australia is just a penal colony. Everybody's locked up. You're locked in your houses. You can't move 2 feet. You're not allowed to, kiss your wife. There's like, it was just, we have this. What's the difference between the perception of like life was unbearable during COVID for Australians and the reality? How bad was it? How was it livable? You mentioned you're in the Florida, in the spot that you'd want to be. But
Yeah.
I guess rumor versus reality. What was Australia like during COVID?
Yeah, so it's kind of, that's all true in particular areas. So the big one being the city of Melbourne in the state of Victoria, which is, if people remember what Australia looks like, there's Victoria down in one little corner of it. It's a pretty small geographical state, southern sort of bottom right corner on the map. It's, politically, it's kind of like our New York. It's very left. It had a guy named Dan Andrews was the premier, which is kind of like the governor of that state. And he was far and away the most lockdown draconian of the state premiers. Douche. I think he was the highest paid politician in the country for an extended period, and he has run that state into just enormous amounts of debt, which they're now trying to figure out. He's finally not the premier anymore, and it's awful. Dude needed to go to jail. Like, I don't think it's going to happen, but it should. Anyway, he locked down Victoria and particularly the city of Melbourne real hard. People couldn't get haircuts. I don't know if any of your viewers are familiar with a guy named Avi Yemeni. He's an Australian guy tied up with Rebel News. He's been doing a bunch of stuff around Israel and Hamas lately, but I think he's got a big enough following that some listeners might know of him. But he's from Melbourne, so he was doing a lot of pushback on all the Dan Andrews lockdown stuff. But if you see his videos from that time, he's got super long hair because no one could get a haircut. No hairdressers were allowed to be open. Crazy stuff like that. I remember I sent something through to Tom Woods via email that he then put in a newsletter and read on. He read it in a speech somewhere.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so I knew someone who they just put a thing up on Facebook or something about just their reflections about being locked down in Melbourne, and it felt totally inhuman. And I sent a snippet of that. I think it might have been in Tom's private group, and he read it out in a speech. Just this sort of semi-poetic lament from someone in Melbourne about how horrible it was. I think the rule was you couldn't go more than 5 kilometers from your home. You could go outside to exercise for an hour a day, but you had to stay within 5 kilometers of your home. People got in trouble with the police. I don't know if they arrested or they got charged with things because on their walk, their daily exercise ration, they would take signs that said, kick out Dan Andrews. We don't want him as premier anymore. These, political signs, and they'd be told, no, you're allowed to be outside to exercise, not to protest. That's different. And this is not a permissible reason to be outside hosting a protest. You can get out for exercise only. It was bad. So that was Victoria. That was the worst of it. Meanwhile, up here in Queensland, so I at the time was living in the Gold Coast, which is second biggest city in this state, and it's only 45 minutes from the big capital city. So it's almost like one big city, almost. It's about 1.5 million people across both cities, so just for a sense of scale. In the city, Queensland, like a lot of people wore masks, a lot of people didn't. It's kind of 50-50. Some people were like checking in with QR codes in their phones. There was like an official state government app that you're meant to use everywhere you went. Scan a barcode, check in so people know where you've been and they can do contact tracing. A lot of people checked in. A lot of people didn't. Didn't seem to be a lot of consequences. There was only a handful of times that I went somewhere and they actually made me check in to come in. So I went to a crypto meetup at the casino. The casino had really strict rules about, no, you must check in. I think I did it that one time, so I wanted to do the meetup, but mostly not a huge deal. Most people ignored it eventually. So a lot of people did it at the start, and over time, more and more people just ignored it and didn't check in places. I know some people who are about 3 hours out from the city, out more into kind of farm country. And talking to them about it, they said, I never saw a single person wear a mask in person. I only saw masks on TV.
That's funny. I was in the
So
grocery
that
store
kind of,
earlier, and there's still people wearing masks now. Like there's a certain
yeah.
subset of people that never got over the mask thing. What about the
Gotcha.
vaccine requirements? Because I remember, I think it was
Yeah.
it was New Zealand that went really crazy on that. But Australia, did you have the same type of mandates there?
Yeah. Australia wasn't good. Uh, it was okay for me because of the industry I work in. I do software development, and my company just went, right, while COVID's going on, we're all just going to work from home. We're going to go full remote. We already had a bunch of people on our team working remote, and some in other countries and things. We had all the infrastructure for that. So we said, right, we're all just going remote. We're going to work from home until this blows over. And so there wasn't really an issue of, do you need to be vaccinated to be in the office? Which is, we weren't in the office anyway. So it was just a don't ask, don't tell kind of thing. My wife, on the other hand, is a nurse. And for her, it was, so she was on maternity leave for a bit of the early period because we were having our first kids. But when it was time for her to be looking at going back and doing some nursing work again, it was a case of her old company was going, no, like no jab, no work. You have to be fully up to date on all the vaccinations. What has happened over time, go agorism, is that it's become apparent that a lot of the nursing staff refused, said, no worries, I won't work at all. Then I'll find something else to do, or I'll find somewhere else to go. And so there's been this huge shortage, and just bit by bit they've quietly been caving in on all those policies and been, actually, yeah, you can come back. We won't enforce that anymore. So that was all done. Yeah, the lines were blurry between how much of that was government mandate and how much of that was these kind of private companies that are mostly government funded imposing their own rules, and the lines between state coercion and corporate stuff there are pretty blurry. But basically, it's lifted at this point. You don't have to be jabbed to be a nurse or a physio or things like that anymore. For a while, it was quite rough.
They're still pushing these shots. I still see advertisements every once in a while for you go to the pharmacy and they're like, get your flu and COVID vaccine combo. Or Fauci will still come on TV occasionally and push these things when the evidence is clear that they don't work. By the way, this part's probably getting clipped from YouTube. There's no point in posting this portion of the talk. But yeah, it's I don't know. The whole thing is it's funny. I'm glad Tom Wood is writing a book called Diary of a Psychosis. I think it's called. He's gonna launch it pretty soon. I think he's finished up. But it's so easy to forget how messed up the situation was at the time and how horrible it felt. Like, to just be, because I didn't get the shot. There were, I couldn't go in stadiums certain times. I couldn't go in certain restaurants. And I'm like, dude, for a thing that it didn't look like it was working, no matter what people were saying anyway. So you're like, there's a shot that doesn't work. There's a high risk, at least, of some type of side effects, which I don't think we've fully seen now. I know there's people in like dating apps, there's people like pretending they didn't get vaccinated now because so many people are like, well, you probably can't have kids. So there's all these fallout things that people are worried about now. And it was just forced on, not forced, obviously. You didn't have to get it. You could always quit your job and move to the mountains, which is, I moved to the mountains. I didn't have to quit my job, luckily, go freelancing. But it's the level of coercion and pressure that the government put on people. It's so easy to go, well, that was extraordinary circumstance, except what's their next extraordinary circumstance? So it's one of those things that I think it woke a lot of people up, and I'm interested to see what the fallout's going to be over the next few years. I think one of the fallouts is going to be a lot more people want to do freelancing. It's going to become it's already one of the fastest growing career options. And I think it's going to blow up, which is why we're starting a software company around that.
Exactly. We're here to help. You want to go freelancing? We want to help you do it.
All right. Is there anything else we want to touch on before we get out of here?
Yes, because if you're in a situation like mine, maybe it's Australia, maybe it's some other country, you can't get guns. There are ways to defend yourself, and we were talking about this recently.
Oh, yes.
Homemade weapons is a thing that you want to be able to learn how to do. And just to test this theory, recently I was at a birthday party and I went to a friend of mine. So I grew up not in a big city, in like a relatively small town. We went camping a lot. I grew up with a lot of small town, semi-farmy kind of kids. And we all just had passed down from our dads mostly how to make orange cannon spud gun. Goes by many names. But it's basically a bunch of PVC pipe. Get a T-joint PVC pipe, I don't know if I can say this on the live stream. This won't be for YouTube. Yeah, PVC pipe, spray deodorant in there, light it with a barbecue lighter, and whatever was down the pipe will shoot out the end of the pipe. If that's a tennis ball, that's for fun. You shoot it up in the air, you can catch it. You wouldn't want to get hit by it at close range, but it's not going to kill anybody. On the other hand, I mean, it happens to fit very well a beer bottle full of water. That's a lot more deadly. And we played with these things on certain camping trips that, sure, they were highly illegal to make, I'm sure. And when I say we, I mean other people. Totally. But that's kind of the tip of the iceberg. I went to a friend of mine at the party recently and said, hey, if Australia got invaded all of a sudden by who knows what country and under martial law, and we had to mount some kind of defense, do you think that you'd be able to go into a hardware store that was abandoned and put together some reasonable weaponry out of what you found there? And oh yeah, totally. So this is a friend of mine that grew up in this city where it's even less kind of weapony, where people don't do this sort of thing as much. Oh yeah, totally. Pneumatic crossbow, first thing I'd do. And I wasn't even a thing that had occurred to me, but he started describing to me, oh yeah, like I would get some kind of compressed air canisters and make crossbow bolts this way. And he totally thought it through.
So what would that even look like? What would you shoot it out of?
So similar kind of thing. For various applications, you can get very narrow stainless steel piping. So it's maybe 10 millimeters, whatever that is in inches wide. You can find big bags of ball bearings for certain applications that shoot out of those quite nicely. It's very much like a musket.
Nice.
So yeah, basically, a lot of people you meet in Australia, even though we don't have guns, if you gave us, access to a hardware store and a few spare hours, we could make a bunch of muskets and mortars makeshift. We've all thought about how to do it because it's sort of ingrained. I think it's ingrained all the way going back to World War II, because whether this was propaganda or not, it became part of the national consciousness that we could be invaded by somewhere in Southeast Asia at the time, probably Japan. But there's a movie called Red Dawn that's about the US being invaded by an Asian power. There's a very similar plot movie called Tomorrow When the War Began. It was actually a book first and then a movie. Very similar idea that we would get invaded by some coalition from Southeast Asia. And it's about a bunch of Australian teenagers who they were out camping when the invasion happened, escaped being rounded up into the prison camp, and so they mount a guerrilla resistance. And we all read that book in high school, and we've all thought hard about, okay, like if I had to steal a petrol truck and blow up a bridge to block a supply line, if I had to make makeshift weapons, this is how I'd do it. I'd make sure I had access to these things. We're very scrappy ex-convict guerrilla type people.
I remember, I don't know why I thought of it, but I grew up watching Home Alone like every Christmas, and Macaulay Culkin rigs that house with paint cans and marbles and, every little thing. It's funny what you can turn into a weapon when you're desperate enough. But that's, I think that's true. You were talking about people modifying Nerf guns at one point too.
So if you go out on the internet, you can find all kinds of interesting things people do to Nerf guns. I've seen people modify Nerf guns to the point where they can break clay pigeons. So they toy with springs and soup them up and add parts and whatever. It's not a thing I've done myself. Good friends of mine have played with modifying Nerf guns, but yeah, I couldn't tell you all the details, but it's pretty impressive, some of the power that you can get out of a Nerf gun. It's
funny. The person I bought my current house from had a grown-up son that used to have giant Nerf battles, apparently. So he gave me a couple tubs of Nerf weaponry. So I have a Nerf arsenal in my basement. So there's some complicated features in some Nerf guns out there. And some of those things really do sting. And even just the foam balls can sting when they hit you. So yeah, I could see how there's modifications that could be made to make them maybe not lethal, but certainly a little more painful.
I'll make one more comment for Queensland, the great state of Queensland. Listeners are probably familiar with paintball. Maybe some are familiar with something called gel blasting. Very, very similar thing, but much smaller pellets, much cheaper ammo, so you shoot a lot more, but they're also much more accurate. So I think it's better for like learning, tactical advances and this sort of thing. So you can do gel blasting at various sort of paintball type fields. But Queensland is the only state in Australia where you can legally have all your own gel blasting gear and keep it at home. Where every other state, if you want to have paintball gear, it's got to stay at the paintball field all locked up and everything. But in Queensland, you can have your own gel blasting stuff at home.
Well, congratulations on your freedom.
Thank you. Sounds ridiculous, but if you got to be in Australia, you might as well be in Queensland.
Yeah, I mean that's it. There's better and worse places all over the world. Every country in the world has this feature where you can move to somewhere that's more free. Like I'm sure it's true in rural China is better than being in Beijing. Every place in the world. I don't know about North Korea. It probably just sucks everywhere there. But for the most part,
Probably. South Korea is that place.
yeah. I've been to different towns in England, in the UK. There's definitely different levels of conservative and values or freedom. And I've been all over Germany. There's definitely rural Germany has a just different attitude than the Dusseldorfs and the Berlins of the world. So, I mean, if you're going to be in a country that's has problems, and all of them do, um, you can just still find the best place. So it sounds like you found it.
Yeah, totally. Even though people they don't necessarily have all the same ideology I do about anarchism and libertarianism. People in the town I'm in, they just do agorism by default. They all grow their own food and they swap it with each other, and it's just part of life here.
It's a beautiful thing, and hopefully you'll have a thriving business there soon, even though technically we're based in the US.
We will be based in the US, yes. So it's all a good foundation for me if I ever do want to skip the country and come to the US.
You'll have a successful business to run to.
I'll have a good argument for why I want to be there.
Well, you'll also be able to get a visa pretty easily if you're 50%
so.
owner of a U.S. business. It's that's already paying taxes. They're going to be like, yeah, sure, come in. It's you're not going to be a burden on the state. Although hopefully they don't
I'd hope that would help.
Hopefully they don't read your books before they look at your visa application. All right. Anything else?
No, I think that's good for a day.
All right. Well, we're gonna have this conversation every couple weeks. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions for Nick, anything about Australia, anything you want to get his perspective on, just shoot me an email, support@henrybingaman.com, or drop in the comments below. And it's you give us some questions, we'll film that for you. But until next time, Nick, any last words? You need a signature sign-off phrase.
I do. Let's say, stay free, do lots of freelancing.
We'll work on that. All right, everybody. Till next time, stay free.